The dust hung thick in the twilight air, a shimmering haze that painted the ruined valley in shades of bronze and shadow. Somewhere beyond the ridge line, the Phantom Operatives, elite mercenaries who had earned their name through their ability to strike unseen and vanish without trace, were regrouping after a brutal raid. The official military response had been too slow, too bogged down in strategy meetings and politics to counter them effectively. Instead, a handful of experimental units were deployed into the frontier zones, testing cutting-edge weapons and scouting for weaknesses in the Phantom's formations. Among those units was a young recruit, barely 20 years old, known in the barracks only as Kane. He had been laughed at for his quietness, ignored for his lack of combat medals, and largely dismissed as a rookie with nothing to offer. Nobody expected him to be the one carrying the experimental XM09 Horizon, a rifle whispered about in defense circles as the most advanced precision firearm ever designed. The Horizon was not an ordinary sniper's tool. Its elongated barrel was lined with superconductive rails, channeling magnetically propelled acceleration for tungsten carbide slugs that could slice through modern body armor as if it were paper. Its optical system wasn't just glass, it was quantum-linked to satellite positioning arrays, allowing the scope to overlay wind vectors, thermal currents, and even gravitational adjustments across extreme ranges. Theoretically, it was capable of hitting a target beyond 3,000 yards with the right user. Theoretically. No one had yet proven it in the field. To hand such a weapon to a rookie seemed insane, yet the logistics officer had shrugged when Kane was assigned the rifle, muttering that the veterans didn't want untested toys slowing them down. So Kane carried it quietly, almost reverently, as if it were not just a weapon but a burden. He had spent weeks in the simulation range, memorizing how the rifle breathed, how the recoil thrummed through his shoulder like a heartbeat, how the optics whispered endless numbers he had to translate into action. He never fired without purpose. Tonight, though, he was about to make the shot that would etch his name into military legend. The mission briefing had been simple: delay the Phantom Operatives long enough for evacuation convoys to clear the valley settlements. Intelligence suggested the Phantoms had set up an overwatch nest near the old transmission towers, abandoned steel skeletons that still rose against the skyline. From there, the mercenaries could rain precision fire on anyone foolish enough to move openly. Veteran marksmen had tried and failed to pin them down. The Phantoms shifted position too fast, their counter-snipers cloaked by adaptive camo, their spotters vanishing like smoke. Kane had crawled into position alone, belly pressed to the dry earth, cradling the XM09 against his chest. His HUD flickered with readings: distance, elevation, wind drag. He blinked through the helmet interface, marking faint glints among the towers that betrayed enemy optics. The nearest reading came back, 2,850 yards. Nearly 2 miles. It was the kind of number you read in weapons brochures, not in battlefield conditions. He exhaled slowly, steadying his pulse. Impossible, he thought. And yet his hands did not tremble. Through the enhanced optics he caught a shimmer, an operator adjusting their rifle scope at the top of a bent tower. The Phantoms were ghosts, but even ghosts left shadows. Kane let the targeting system sink, then switched it off. The Horizon could predict and calculate, yes, but ultimately it demanded trust between weapon and wielder. Numbers alone could not make a bullet cross such distance. Instinct had to guide the final trigger squeeze. He remembered the training sergeant's scornful words echoing in his ears. "Kid, you don't have the nerves for this. You'll flinch. You'll miss." Maybe they were right. Maybe this was the moment he would prove them right. Or maybe not. He slid the bipod legs into the soil, aligned his cheek with the stock, and allowed himself to sink into the silence between heartbeats. The battlefield around him roared faintly with distant fire. Automated turrets chattered sporadically as evacuation convoys rolled across the horizon. Radio chatter buzzed faintly in his ear, commanders barking updates, squads reporting losses, someone screaming for medics. Kane muted it all. The world narrowed to the scope's circle, the crosshairs trembling ever so slightly over a target that seemed impossibly small at that range. A Phantom operative, cloaked in camo that bent light, barely visible against the rusted steel. He adjusted windage, held his breath. The horizon hummed with power as the magnetic rails charged, a vibration felt more in the bones than in the ears. Kane whispered nothing, thought nothing, became nothing. There was only the rifle, the distance, and the ghost at the other end of it. The trigger broke like glass beneath his finger. The slug tore through the air with a thunderclap that seemed muted by distance, a supersonic shard that cut across valleys and wind currents, a silent reaper unseen until the instant of impact. Kane blinked once, twice, waiting. Then, in the far distance, the shimmer atop the tower collapsed. The Phantom's cloaking field fizzled out as the body tumbled, striking steel beams with a metallic crash before vanishing into the shadows below. The scope adjusted automatically, confirming biometric cessation. Target down. Range, 2,850 yards. Kane exhaled, a tremor running through him, not fear but disbelief. He had done it. Against every voice that told him he was too green, too untested, too ordinary, he had made the impossible shot. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Then chaos erupted among the Phantom ranks. Radio intercepts crackled through Kane's headset, fragmented voices in encrypted channels. Sniper? Unconfirmed range? What the hell? Movements surged around the towers as cloaked figures scrambled for cover, their discipline fractured by the sudden realization that they were not untouchable. The Horizon's shot had not only dropped one of their own but shattered the illusion of invisibility they relied on. Veteran operatives, killers who had never known fear, were suddenly scanning the skies as if hunted by something beyond comprehension. Kane's hand stayed steady on the rifle. He chambered another round, eyes already seeking the next flicker of light, the next ripple of motion. This was no longer about evacuation delays or holding a defensive line. This was about rewriting the rules of engagement. What Kane didn't know, what none of them knew, was that High Command was monitoring his scope feed live. Generals, analysts, and weapons engineers watched in stunned silence as the confirmation flashed across the encrypted uplink. XM-09 Horizon, confirmed kill, distance, 2,850 yards. Men and women who had dismissed the rookie as expendable now leaned forward in disbelief, some muttering curses, others whispering prayers of gratitude. The Horizon had finally proven itself, and the one who had wielded it was no decorated veteran, no hardened sniper with decades of service, but a quiet young man who had slipped beneath notice. Kane became, in that instant, the pivot point of a battle and perhaps the war. The Phantom operatives had built their reputation on being untouchable. Tonight, a rookie armed with a prototype rifle had reminded them that no one was beyond reach. The valley did not remain quiet for long. Within minutes of the shot, the Phantoms reorganized, their confusion crystallizing into something far more dangerous: anger. These were not ordinary fighters who panicked under fire. They were killers trained to hunt predators, soldiers who had dismantled entire platoons with surgical precision. The fact that one of their own had been dropped from nearly 3,000 yards was less a tactical setback than a personal insult. They prided themselves on invisibility, on moving unseen through the cracks of battle. Someone had just burned their legend to the ground. Kane knew it, even before the encrypted chatter buzzing through his helmet was translated by the uplink AI. He felt it in the sudden silence that blanketed the towers, in the stillness that was more ominous than chaos. The Phantoms weren't scattering anymore. They were triangulating. They were hunting. Kane's first instinct was to relocate. Every sniper learned that after firing you moved, never lingered. A counter-sniper's bullet could already be on the way. But the Horizon wasn't an ordinary rifle. Its bulk and power made it difficult to shift quickly, and Kane knew the terrain was open on either side of his ridge. Moving now might expose him, and against operatives of this caliber, exposure was death. He checked his scope again, scanning for any sign of advancing figures. For several long seconds there was nothing. Then, faintly at the edge of his vision, he caught it, the distortion of light like heat mirage creeping through the rocks. Adaptive camouflage. They were already flanking him. The rookie's mind raced. He had no squad nearby, no immediate backup. Command had dispatched him as an auxiliary, a piece on the board nobody expected to matter. The evac convoys were still crawling towards safety. If the Phantoms broke through this ridge, they could cut into those columns like knives. Kane's single impossible shot had stalled them, but it had also drawn their fury. He had marked himself as a target. He whispered a breath and pulled back from the scope, letting the HUD feed him overlays. 3 signals converging, 30 seconds out. 1 behind, 2 on either flank. They weren't rushing him, they were tightening the noose, testing his reactions. He realized with a sick twist in his gut that they wanted him alive. They wanted to know who had shattered their illusion of untouchability. If they captured him, his death would be a warning carved into legend. He steadied himself, fingers tightening on the Horizon's grip. "Not today," he muttered. The weapon thrummed faintly, almost as if it agreed. He turned the barrel toward the nearest flank, where the distortion shimmered closer. A rock shifted, a faint glint betrayed the edge of a suppressed barrel. Kane didn't hesitate. The Horizon cracked, rails flashing with kinetic fury, and the slug ripped into the mirage. The camouflage failed in a cascade of sparks as a Phantom staggered, dropping to the earth with a scream muffled by a mask. The other two broke cover immediately, their stealth exchanged for speed. Plasma bolts lanced from their rifles, searing the ridge in bursts of blue light. Kane rolled aside, heat singeing past him, dirt erupting into plumes. The horizon was too slow to fire repeatedly in close combat. He needed to move now. He slung the rifle across his back and scrambled along the ridge, boots skidding against loose stone. Plasma fire followed him, chewing chunks from the ground. One bolt grazed his shoulder, spinning him with pain that flared white across his nerves. He forced himself upright, gasping, adrenaline pumping hot through his veins. The phantoms were relentless, vaulting across boulders with inhuman agility. They weren't just hunters, they were enhanced, cybernetically tuned for pursuit. Kane ducked into a narrow crevice, heart hammering, and pressed his back against stone. He ripped open a field medpack, slapping the auto-seal against his scorched shoulder. Nanogel spread across the wound, numbing it, but his arms still trembled with weakness. He glanced upward, the horizon's weight pressed against him like both a burden and salvation. He couldn't outpace them forever. If he wanted to survive, he had to turn the hunt back on them. Breathing hard, he unlatched a secondary feature of the XM-09 that few even knew existed. The Horizon wasn't merely a sniper rifle, it was a modular platform. A hidden function allowed the barrel to collapse and lock into a shorter railgun mode, trading long-range precision for brutal mid-range stopping power. Kane slid it into place, the weapon compressing with a hiss. He checked the charge, 3 slugs chambered. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but maybe enough for escape. He calmed his pulse, listening. The phantoms were close, their movements unnervingly quiet, the faint crunch of boots softened by dampeners. They were speaking in low bursts of encrypted comms. The AI in Kane's helmet scrambled translations. Alive. Take alive. Orders. The words made his skin crawl. The first phantom rounded the corner of the crevice. Kane didn't think, he reacted. The Horizon barked in its railgun mode, the slug slamming into the operative's chest with bone-shattering force. The cloaking field burst, revealing a figure clad in matte black armor, thrown backward in a spray of sparks and shattered plating. The second came from above, dropping silently with a blade drawn, a vibroknife glowing with molecular vibration. Kane twisted, barely parrying the strike with the Horizon's reinforced frame. The blade screeched against the rifle's alloy. Kane drove his boot upward, catching the operative in the gut, then shoved the barrel up and fired point blank. The slug tore through the helmet in a flash of light, and the body crumpled atop him. He shoved the corpse aside, gasping for breath, shoulders screaming in agony. 2 down. But the third was nowhere to be seen. The silence stretched, heavier than before. Kane scanned wildly, pulse thundering in his ears. Then, out of the corner of his vision, he saw the distortion sliding along the rocks behind him. Too late. The phantom lunged, faster than thought, slamming him into the dirt. The impact jarred the Horizon from his grip, sending it skidding across the stones. The operative's armored hand clamped around his throat, cutting off air. A voice filtered through the mask, cold and amused. Rookie. The word was a hiss, almost mocking. Kane clawed at the grip, vision dimming, but the phantom was impossibly strong. He could see the glint of restraint cuffs on the operative's belt. They really meant to drag him away. But Kane had something they didn't expect. With his free hand, he reached to his thigh holster and drew the backup sidearm. An old M7 kinetic pistol, outdated compared to plasma weapons but still lethal at point blank. He jammed it under the operative's chin and fired. The shot cracked through bone and circuitry alike, and the phantom collapsed, lifeless, his grip slackening. Kane rolled away, coughing violently, air searing his lungs. He lay there for a moment, staring at the blood-stained rocks, until his hand trembled toward the Horizon and pulled it close once more. 3 phantoms down. But this was only a fraction of their force. They would not forgive him for this. They would come harder, faster, and in greater numbers. And yet, as he dragged himself upright, he realized something else. He had survived their first counter-hunt. He, the rookie, had stood against the phantoms at close range and lived. Somewhere deep inside, terror mingled with exhilaration. He was no longer just holding the line, he was becoming the weapon they feared. High Command watched in stunned silence, their feeds relaying every desperate second. Analysts whispered that the Horizon was exceeding design thresholds, but even more whispered about Kane himself. What kind of mind, what kind of nerve, let a rookie face the phantoms and not break? The generals exchanged looks, the kind that carried unspoken decisions. This battle was no longer just about protecting evac convoys. It was a proving ground, and Kane had just proven that the impossible was possible. But in the shadows, in encrypted channels far beyond the battlefield, the surviving Phantom commanders whispered too. They marked his name, his face, his weapon. And they vowed that this rookie would not live to see another dawn. The night deepened as the last embers of sunset bled away, leaving the valley drenched in cold darkness. Kane crouched against a slab of shattered concrete, chest heaving, shoulder throbbing with every breath. The horizon rested across his knees, its rail system humming faintly as if aware of the battles it had just survived. He checked the chamber, ejecting the spent cartridge before sliding in a fresh tungsten round. His HUD scrolled with data, most of it irrelevant noise, heart rate spiking, body temperature rising, muscle strain across 70% of his frame. He silenced the alerts with a flick of his eye cursor. What mattered was survival. What mattered was what came next. The Phantoms were not finished. He could feel it in the stillness of the air, in the way even the insects had gone silent. When predators stalked, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Command's voice finally broke through the static. Rogue Sniper, confirmed status. Rogue Sniper, that was the call sign they'd given him after the kill feed reached their headquarters. They didn't even use his name anymore, as if this version of Kane was someone new, someone mythic. He tapped his throat mic, alive. 3 Phantom units down. Still in play. A pause answered him, followed by hushed murmurs he couldn't make out. Then, hold position if possible. Reinforcements are 20 minutes out. Kane almost laughed, a sound dry and bitter in his throat. 20 minutes was an eternity against the Phantoms. He doubted he had 2 minutes before the next strike. Still he gave no argument. Arguing wouldn't save him. The only thing that might was readiness. The horizon scope flickered with ambient light amplification, peeling back the darkness layer by layer. Through it, Kane saw the ruins of the valley sprawled before him. Collapsed buildings, fractured pipelines, the skeletal frames of abandoned towers. Every shadow could hide a Phantom. Every corner could be a kill zone. He shifted carefully, moving to a higher ledge that overlooked the valley floor. If they wanted him, they would have to climb, and climbing made even ghosts vulnerable. He set the rifle on its bipod, adjusting elevation. Then he waited. Waiting was the hardest part. Muscles itched to move, adrenaline begged for release, but patience was the sniper's deadliest weapon. He slowed his breathing, steadied his pulse, and let the night swallow him. It didn't take long. A shimmer moved across the valley floor, then another. At first glance it looked like nothing more than heat distortion, but Kane's scope translated the pattern into 3 distinct silhouettes. Then more. His stomach tightened. A dozen signatures converging, fanning out in a net. The Phantoms had decided subtlety was over. They were sweeping the valley in force. Kane's earlier kills had rattled them, but now they were angry, coordinated, determined. He tracked the lead figure through the scope, noting how they advanced in stuttered bursts, never fully exposing themselves. This was a hunt, orchestrated by professionals who had likely executed hundreds of similar traps. And yet, they had underestimated one thing: the horizon in his hands. He waited until the first operative broke into a sprint between cover. His finger squeezed, and the horizon thundered. The slug tore across the darkness, punching through armor and flinging the body into a roll. Before the others could react, he adjusted, fired again, and a second Phantom dropped. But the rest didn't scatter. They surged forward. Plasma fire erupted from half a dozen rifles, blue-white bolts searing through the night. Kane ducked low, the ridge shattering around him as molten rock sprayed his armor. He rolled, repositioned, fired blind through the scope's thermal overlay. Another operative dropped, cloak flickering out. Still they came. The air itself seemed to hum with their fury. Kane's comms crackled with command again. Rogue Sniper, fall back. Do not let them encircle you. He almost shouted back that he had nowhere to fall back to, but bit down the words. Instead, he slammed the horizon into its compact mode and vaulted from his position, sliding down a slope of broken stone. Plasma fire followed him, lighting up the night like a storm of falling stars. He hit the ground hard, rolled, came up firing. The rail slug ripped into one Phantom at mid-range, the impact so violent it hurled the body against a wall with a crunch. Kane sprinted, lungs burning, weaving between ruins as the rest chased him. They weren't just hunting now, they were herding, forcing him deeper into the valley, away from the evac convoys. He realized the sick truth: they weren't just reacting to him. They had a plan. And he was already inside it. The terrain funneled him toward the old industrial zone, where towering silos and collapsed cranes loomed like jagged skeletons. It was a kill box, perfect for an ambush. Kane knew it, but he had no choice. His shoulder screamed every time he raised the rifle, his legs ached from sprinting but stopping meant death. He dove into the shadows of a silo, pressing his back to cold metal. The HUD showed 6 hostiles still advancing, their formation tightening. He checked his ammo, 4 slugs left in railgun mode, 7 in sniper mode plus his sidearm. Not enough for what was coming. But then again, when had the numbers ever favored him tonight? He allowed himself a grim smile. If the Phantoms wanted to make him a legend, he would give them a legend worth fearing. The first 2 entered the silo yard cautiously, cloaks shimmering. Kane dropped low, using the horizon's thermal overlay to paint their bodies in shades of orange. He fired once, twice. Both targets fell, their cloaks failing in crackling bursts. The others roared back with plasma fire, arcs of light cutting through the dark like divine wrath. Kane ducked, slid between rusted machinery and popped up on the other side to fire again. Another Phantom crumpled, armor sparking. But they were fast, so fast. One vaulted overhead, landing behind him. Kane spun, slamming the rifle but into the operative's chest, then rolled away as a blade hissed down where his head had been. He fired blind over his shoulder, the slug catching the Phantom in the thigh and sending him crashing down. The others pressed closer, relentless. Time fractured into a blur of movement, noise, and instinct. Kane fired, rolled, reloaded, fired again. Sparks showered the air as plasma bolts struck metal inches from him. At one point a bolt grazed his helmet, blinding him with static across the HUD. He tore it off, fighting bare-eyed now, breath fogging in the cold air. His vision narrowed to the gleam of armor, the ripple of cloaks, the crash of boots. He was no longer just a sniper. He was prey and predator, dancing on the knife edge between death and legend. And still, impossibly, he survived. At last the yard fell silent. Kane stood trembling, rifle smoking, body sprawled around him. 6 Phantoms, maybe more. His ears rang with silence. He sank to one knee, exhaustion finally breaking through the adrenaline. His shoulder felt like fire, his throat raw from gasping breaths. But he was alive. Against overwhelming odds, he had turned their hunt into slaughter. For the second time tonight, he had proven the impossible possible. Yet even in victory, dread coiled in his gut. Because the Phantoms were not finished. This was just the beginning. He had embarrassed them twice now, humiliated their operatives, broken the myth of their untouchability. They would not retreat. They would escalate. And sure enough, as he lifted his gaze to the skyline, he saw it. Dark shapes descending through the clouds, silent and massive. Dropships. At least 3, their engines muted by stealth systems, their silhouettes blotting out the stars. Reinforcements. The Phantoms had committed more than just a strike team. They were deploying a war party. Kane's lips parted in a dry laugh. Alone, wounded, nearly out of ammo, he was about to face a small army. He tightened his grip on the horizon, whispered to the night, "Come and see." The night split open with the whisper of descending dropships, their outlines blotting the stars like great black wings. Kane crouched among the wreckage, heart pounding, watching as the Phantom vessels settled with eerie silence onto the valley floor. Their engines emitted no thunder, no dust clouds, just the faint shimmer of air distortion. These weren't conventional military carriers, they were stealth craft designed for insertion, unseen until the moment their bay doors opened. And when they did, the world seemed to darken further. Shadows spilled out, coalescing into armored figures that moved with predatory grace. Dozens of them, more than Kane could count. He felt his throat tighten. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was an execution. The Phantoms weren't here to outmaneuver him, they were here to bury him. He pressed his cheek against the horizon stock, staring through the scope. The first squad advanced in precise formation, cloaks phasing in and out of visibility as they scanned the ruins. He could pick off 1, maybe 2, but then the rest would converge. His ammunition readout glared at him. 4 slugs in compact mode, 7 in sniper mode, a half-empty magazine in his pistol. That was all. Against what looked like an entire platoon of augmented killers. His rational mind whispered the obvious. Impossible. His body trembled, begging him to run. But run where? The valley was sealed. The dropships cut off escape and reinforcements were still minutes away. Minutes he didn't have. He exhaled slowly, forcing the tremor from his hands. If he was to die here, he would do it on his terms. 1 shot, 1 kill until the end. He waited until the squad passed beneath a collapsed crane, their silhouettes painted against the open ground. The horizon thundered, a rail slug splitting the night. The lead operative fell, armor cracking, body tumbling. Panic rippled through the squad, but only for an instant. Then they surged forward, plasma fire erupting like a storm. Kane dropped flat as molten bolts shredded his cover, sparks raining down. He rolled to the side, lined up another shot, and took the head off a second phantom before they could triangulate him. Then he was moving, always moving, slipping between shadows as plasma fire carved the ruins into molten slag. The horizon glowed faintly with heat, its rails screaming for cooldown. He ignored it, chambering another round. The next target dropped with a hole through the chest, cloak fizzing out. 3 down. 20 more advancing. The world narrowed into chaos. Kane fired, ducked, sprinted, fired again. Every shot had to count, there was no room for waste. He aimed not just to kill but to disrupt, dropping squad leaders, gunners, anyone whose fall might sow hesitation. 4 fleeting moments it worked, their lines faltered, cohesion broke. But the phantoms adapted with terrifying speed, splitting into fire teams, flanking him from multiple angles. Plasma bolts streaked past his face, one grazing his leg and sending him stumbling. He crawled behind a collapsed pipeline, gasping, forcing his burning muscles to move. He reloaded with trembling fingers, sweat dripping into his eyes. Every breath hurt. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Yet still, impossibly, he fought. The horizon sang again, another phantom dropping. But this time he wasn't fast enough. A plasma bolt seared into the pipeline beside him, detonating it in a burst of superheated gas. The blast hurled him across the yard, slamming him into concrete. His helmet cracked, vision blurring. Pain flared down his side where shards had torn through armor. For a moment he lay there, ears ringing, body screaming. He thought this might be the end, that the next moment would bring a blade across his throat or a bolt through his chest. But instinct dragged him upright, hands fumbling for the horizon. Through the blur he saw 3 shapes closing, blades drawn, eyes glowing faint behind their masks. They weren't firing anymore. They wanted to finish him with steel. Kane steadied the rifle, vision narrowing to the closest target. He fired. The slug ripped the phantom apart mid-stride. He pivoted, fired again, dropping the second. The third leapt, blade flashing. Kane rolled, the weapon slipping from his grasp. The blade sliced across his armor, sparks showering. He twisted, drew his pistol, and emptied the magazine into the operative's chest. The body fell atop him, heavy and hot. Kane shoved it aside, gasping, his lungs burning like fire. The pistol clicked empty. The horizon lay a few feet away, its rails glowing faintly in the dark. He dragged it close, chambered another round. His hand trembled so hard he almost dropped it. He was bleeding now, warmth soaking down his side. The world tilted with every breath. Yet his eyes stayed locked forward. He wasn't finished. The phantoms regrouped, moving slower now, circling the yard like wolves. They had lost a dozen men already, maybe more. But they were patient. They could see Kane weakening. They could smell blood. They wanted him alive, but if it came to killing, they would do it with satisfaction. Kane wiped blood from his lip, breathing hard. His HUD flickered, reinforcements still 7 minutes out. 7 minutes might as well be 7 years. He lifted the horizon, sighted through the cracked scope, and whispered, "Come on then." The night answered with silence, followed by the faint crunch of boots. Then they surged again, all at once, a tide of shadows and fire. Kane braced himself, body screaming, and pulled the trigger. Another slug cut down a phantom, the recoil slamming into his torn shoulder. He screamed with the pain but chambered another round, fired again. Another enemy fell. He was no longer calculating windage, distance, or trajectory. Every shot was instinct, muscle memory, desperation honed into precision. He fired until the rifle clicked empty, then reloaded, fired again. He moved like a man already dead, fighting not for survival but for defiance. Plasma bolts tore the air around him, some striking home, searing his armor, burning flesh. He barely felt it anymore. The world was only the rifle, the trigger, the endless tide of enemies. And then, above the chaos, a new sound cut through the night, a roar, distant but growing. Engines. Not phantom stealth craft, but something heavier, louder, unhidden. Kane blinked through the haze, barely comprehending, until his comms lit up with a voice. "Hold, rogue sniper. Reinforcements inbound." His chest clenched with disbelief. They were early. Command had pushed them faster. Through the blur of smoke and plasma fire, he saw it. Armored transports cresting the ridge, gunships banking low, their cannons already blazing. Blue plasma fire turned the night into chaos as the reinforcements tore into the phantom lines. Operatives scattered, some fighting, some vanishing into cloaks. The tide shifted in an instant. Kane collapsed to his knees, the horizon slipping from his hands, vision dimming. He had held. Against the impossible, against numbers that should have buried him, he had held until help arrived. As darkness closed around him, he heard one last thing, the voice of command, quiet, almost reverent. The rookie did it. He broke the phantoms. Then silence, and Kane let go, falling into the black. The night had grown cold, and the desert winds carried a biting edge that cut through even the thickest cloaks. But inside the encampment, the phantom operatives were gathered in tense silence. Rourke sat apart from them, his rifle leaning on a crate beside him, its matte black frame absorbing the dim light of the lanterns. The others were still processing what they had witnessed earlier. The rookie, with no official combat record, had managed an impossible shot across nearly 2 miles, striking the target with a precision that even the most experienced of them would hesitate to attempt. Some whispered among themselves, disbelief threading their words, while others studied him with narrowed eyes, as if trying to peel away his exterior and uncover the secret hidden within him. Yet Rourke said nothing. He stared into the distance, his thoughts circling around the same unsettling realization. He had no explanation for what he had done, only the undeniable proof of the bullet's impact. It was Silas, the team's taciturn leader, who finally broke the silence. He stood near the tactical table, its surface alive with glowing topographical projections of the enemy's movement, and fixed his gaze on Rourke. "That shot," he said in a low voice that carried an edge of restrained suspicion, "wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. You saw wind drift, humidity, the rotation of the earth, and you calculated faster than our best systems could. You knew exactly where to place the round. Don't insult us by pretending you don't know how you did it." His words cut through the air like steel, demanding an answer. Rourke shifted uncomfortably, but before he could speak, another operative, Vance, leaned forward from the shadows, his scarred face tense with doubt. "No rookie pulls that off. Hell, half the snipers in the world couldn't dream of it. Who trained you? Where did you learn the Horizon system?" His tone wasn't curiosity, it was accusation, a blade disguised as a question. Rourke swallowed hard. The truth was something even he didn't fully understand. He had only been issued the XM-09 Horizon weeks before, during rush training that was meant to familiarize him with its systems. He hadn't mastered it, at least he hadn't thought he had. Yet, in the moment of that shot, when the Phantom team had looked to him with skepticism, he had felt something shift. His vision had sharpened, his heartbeat slowed, and all the chaos of distance and calculation had dissolved into a single crystalline line between him and the target. He remembered how natural it had felt, as though his body and the weapon had fused, as though the rifle itself whispered the solution into his mind. He lifted his eyes to Silas and Vance, their gazes sharp and unyielding, and spoke carefully. "I don't know how to explain it. I just knew. It wasn't calculation, it was like instinct. The Horizon didn't feel like a tool in my hands. It felt alive." The murmurs around him grew louder, operatives exchanging unsettled looks. The XM-09 Horizon was experimental, yes, but it was still just a weapon, a combination of cutting-edge optics, adaptive ballistics, and digital assistance. For a soldier to describe it as alive sent shivers down the spine of veterans who had seen too many projects end in disaster. Silas narrowed his eyes, clearly torn between suspicion and the nagging awareness that Rourke might be telling the truth. "Instinct doesn't land a shot at nearly 3,000 yards, Silas muttered. "Not unless something else is at play." Then, almost as if admitting something reluctantly, he added, "And if that's true, then maybe you're not here by accident. Maybe Command knew what they were doing when they sent you." Rourke wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was no different from any other rookie, but the words died in his throat. Deep down he too wondered if there was something more. His past had always been different. Even in training, instructors had remarked on his uncanny ability to anticipate trajectories, to react faster than simulations allowed. He had chalked it up to luck or an overactive mind, but what if it wasn't? What if he had been chosen for this mission because someone knew his potential before he did? The thought unsettled him, but it also sparked a flicker of defiance. If he was capable of doing what others thought impossible, then maybe he wasn't the liability they assumed he was. The night wore on, and the team eventually returned to their duties, though tension lingered like smoke. Some avoided him entirely, unwilling to trust what they didn't understand, while others watched him too closely, as though waiting for him to make a mistake that would prove their suspicions right. Alone with his thoughts, Rourke replayed the moment of the shot over and over, dissecting every detail, trying to understand the connection he had felt with the Horizon rifle. It wasn't just a weapon. The way its digital reticle shifted, the way its internal processor seemed to sync with his focus, the subtle pulse he swore he had felt through the grip. None of it could be dismissed as coincidence. The Horizon was built for precision, but in his hands, it had become something more. It had become an extension of himself. The next day their mission continued. The Phantoms were tasked with infiltrating deeper into enemy territory, a region crawling with insurgents armed with stolen tech. Their path was treacherous, weaving through canyons and shattered ruins that offered little cover. Rourke stayed near the rear, rifle ready, his senses alert. He could feel the weight of their gazes even when they didn't speak to him. The memory of the impossible shot still hung between them, unspoken yet undeniable. They advanced cautiously, but trouble came swiftly. A sudden ambush erupted from the ridges, muzzle flashes sparking in the rocks above. Bullets rained down, and the team scattered for cover, returning fire with ruthless precision. Rourke dove behind a jagged boulder, the Horizon clutched tightly in his hands, his heart hammering. This was no controlled test, no long-distance challenge. This was chaos, and in chaos rookies were expected to break. But something inside him didn't break. As he steadied his rifle, the world slowed again. Every detail sharpened, the dust kicked up. By enemy fire, the ricochet sparks against stone, the shifting silhouettes above. The Horizon scope came alive, feeding him information faster than he could consciously process, but instead of overwhelming him, it folded seamlessly into his instincts. He saw patterns in the enemy's movements, predicted where they would rise before they appeared, and fired with precision that stunned even himself. One shot, then another, each finding its mark with surgical certainty. The ambush began to falter under the withering counterattack, and within minutes, the ridge fell silent. The Phantoms regrouped, breathing hard, their armor scarred by the skirmish. As they glanced at Rourke, there was no mistaking the shift in their eyes. Doubt was giving way to something else. Fear, respect, or perhaps both. Silas approached him afterward, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with intensity. "You're not just a rookie anymore," he said quietly. "Whatever you are, whatever this connection is with that rifle, it's going to change everything. But know this, power like that doesn't come without a price. And sooner or later, someone's going to want to collect." His words sank into Rourke like a weight he couldn't shake. He had earned their attention, perhaps even their respect, but at the same time, he had drawn a spotlight onto himself that he couldn't escape. As the team moved out once more, Rourke tightened his grip on the Horizon, the unspoken truth gnawing at him. His journey had only just begun, and the world was far from ready for what he was becoming. The Horizon's recoil was still humming in Alex's bones when the dust of the last firefight settled. The Phantom operatives had been driven back, leaving only scorched earth, shattered armor, and the acrid tang of ionized air behind. Yet even in that silence, his instincts screamed at him that the war was far from over. He lowered the weapon slowly, scanning the jagged ruins of the valley. His squad was alive, though battered. Reeve leaned against a broken wall with blood trickling down his temple, still grinning despite the wound. Mara was crouched by a ridge, feeding new energy cartridges into her rifle with practiced calm. Captain Harlow stood rigid, her eyes locked on the Horizon where the Phantom retreat trails shimmered faintly in the dust. None of them spoke, and for Alex that silence spoke louder than words. The battle was only a prelude. The rookie tried to calm his own breathing, but the Horizon seemed to amplify everything. His pulse, the tremor in his arms, even the heat rising off his skin. It was not just a weapon. It felt like something alive, something ancient that had chosen him. He remembered how the Phantom leader's armor had cracked under his impossible 2,850-yard shot earlier, and the way the enemy had recoiled in disbelief. That moment had shifted everything. A rookie had done what seasoned operatives had thought impossible. He should have felt pride, but what lingered instead was a weight, a sense that he had been placed on a path far larger than he could control. His hands tightened around the Horizon's grip, and he couldn't shake the thought that the weapon itself had a will. The squad regrouped, picking their way through the debris. Harlow ordered a silent march, leading them toward the extraction point through a labyrinth of broken industrial ruins. The Phantoms had once operated openly here, using abandoned infrastructure as staging grounds. Now those same ruins became a maze of shadows and echoes. Alex found himself at the rear of the formation, weapons slung across his chest. Every crunch of gravel beneath his boots sounded too loud. Every flicker of dust in the air seemed like it might conceal an enemy shimmer. The Phantoms were known for their invisibility tech, half-phase cloaks that made them flicker like heat haze until the kill was already dealt. His nerves screamed that they were still out there, watching, learning. Halfway through the march, Reeve fell back to walk beside him. "Still breathing, rookie?" he asked, voice low and laced with humor. His grin was tired, but there was pride behind it. You keep this up and they'll make ballads about you. First op, impossible shot, and you left a Phantom commander leaking sparks like a broken toy. Alex tried to chuckle, but the sound came out hollow. He admitted that he didn't feel like a hero. Reeves' grin softened into something more serious. Good. Heroes die fast. Soldiers endure. Keep your head down, keep that horizon steady, and maybe you'll live long enough to hate the fame that's coming your way. The words were grounding and Alex nodded. But in his chest, a storm was brewing. When they finally reached the extraction ridge, the sky was already bleeding orange with the fall of day. Their evac dropship hovered low, its engines throwing up a gale of grit and light. The squad boarded, exhaustion weighing on every step. Alex took a seat near the bay door, clutching the horizon tightly, unwilling to set it down even for a moment. The ride back to base was quiet, save for the low thrum of the engines and the distant moans of wounded soldiers being treated by medics. Yet Alex's thoughts were anything but quiet. He kept replaying the Phantom commander's last glance before retreating, a glare not of defeat but of recognition, almost as if the enemy understood something about the horizon's presence that Alex himself did not. Back at the forward operations base, the squad was split apart for debriefings, medical checks, and rest. Alex expected to be scolded for recklessness or sidelined for being inexperienced, but instead he found himself ushered not to a medic's tent, but to a sealed chamber deep within the compound. Captain Harlow accompanied him, her expression unreadable. The room was dimly lit, its walls humming with data screens showing tactical maps and shifting intelligence reports. At the center sat a figure Alex had only ever seen in briefings. General Karan, the architect of their campaign against the Phantoms. The man's presence filled the room, his scarred face and iron eyes pinning Alex in place the moment he stepped inside. You, Karan said, his voice heavy, are not supposed to exist in my records. A rookie, freshly deployed, yet wielding the horizon as though it were forged for you. He gestured toward the weapon still slung across Alex's chest. Do you even understand what you carry? Alex hesitated, then admitted he didn't. Karan leaned forward, his gaze unblinking. That weapon is not just steel and circuits. It is a relic of a forgotten war, designed with technology even we don't fully comprehend. Only a handful in history have been able to synchronize with it. And now, without training, without clearance, you've done what veterans could not. The question, rookie, is why? The words hit Alex like a blow. He wanted to deny it, to insist he was just lucky, that the shot was chance, that he was no chosen savior. But deep inside, he knew luck couldn't explain the way the horizon had almost guided his hands, how the scope had revealed patterns invisible to the naked eye, how the recoil had felt more like resonance than kickback. He could feel Karan's gaze weighing his every hesitation. Finally, Alex whispered that he didn't know why the horizon responded to him, only that it did. Karan studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly as if confirming something only he could see.